Have you ever witnessed someone being torn down in front of hundreds, their dignity stripped away piece by piece, while the crowd watches in uncomfortable silence? This story delves into that crushing weight of public humiliation, but more importantly, it carries within its heart a transformative message about the power of forgiveness that can break the hardest of hearts and rebuild what seemed irreparably broken. It's about how true strength sometimes looks like weakness, and how the smallest acts of grace can trigger avalanches of change that reshape entire communities. The old man's weathered hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the arthritis that had settled into his joints after 40 years of working the community garden behind St. Michael's shelter. Samuel Whitmore adjusted his worn wool vest, the one his late wife had knitted for him 12 winters ago, and steadied himself against the podium. The auditorium stretched before him, filled with 300 concerned citizens who had come to hear about the proposed demolition of the shelter that had served the homeless for over 60 years. The shelter where Samuel had volunteered every single day since his retirement, where he knew every resident by name, where he had held dying men in his arms and helped teenage mothers find hope again. Behind him, seated at the elevated panel, Councilman Daniel Frost checked his expensive watch for the third time in as many minutes. At 38, Daniel was the youngest politician ever elected to the city council, riding a wave of promises about modernization and economic growth. His tailored navy suit probably cost more than Samuel received in 3 months of his modest pension. The developer's check in Daniel's briefcase, the one that would fund his gubernatorial campaign, depended on this shelter being demolished within 6 weeks. Mr. Whitmore, Daniel's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd like a scalpel. You've had your 5 minutes. The council has heard your passionate plea. But passion doesn't pay bills, does it? Samuel turned, his weathered face carrying the dignity of someone who had nothing left to lose except his principles. Councilman Frost, with respect, this isn't about bills. It's about the 43 souls who call that shelter home. Where will old Thomas go? He's 78 and fought in 2 wars for this country. Where will Maria take her 3 children when— "Oh, please!" Daniel stood, his chair scraping against the floor. The sound echoed through the hushed auditorium. "Spare us the sob stories. You want to know what I see when I look at you, Mr. Whitmore? I see a relic, a dusty, outdated relic clinging to dusty, outdated ideas." Gasps rippled through the audience. Someone's phone began recording. Daniel descended from the platform, each step deliberate, predatory. "You stand there in your threadbare vest, probably older than half the people in this room, and lecture us about progress? You who probably still writes checks at the grocery store and thinks the internet is some kind of fishing equipment." A few uncomfortable chuckles rose from Daniel's supporters in the crowd, though most sat in stunned silence. Samuel's eyes, pale blue and clear despite his 71 years, never wavered. "I may be old, Councilman, but—" "Old?" Daniel was close now, close enough that Samuel could smell his expensive cologne. "You're not just old, Mr. Whitmore. You're obsolete. You and your fairy tale beliefs about helping the helpless. This is the real world. Natural selection. The strong survive, the weak, well, they find somewhere else to be weak. These are human beings we're discussing." Samuel's voice carried a quiet strength. "Are they?" Daniel's laugh was sharp. "Because from where I stand, they're drains on the economy, statistics, negative numbers in red ink, and you—" He circled Samuel slowly like a shark. "You enable them. You and your little garden, your soup kitchen, your bedtime prayers. Tell me, when was the last time your invisible friend in the sky actually helped any of them?" The silence that followed was deafening. Samuel's hand instinctively moved to the small wooden cross in his pocket, carved by a homeless veteran named Marcus, who had found his way back to his family after 2 years at the shelter. Marcus, who now ran a successful carpentry business and employed 3 other shelter graduates. "My faith," Samuel said quietly, isn't something I expect you to understand, Councilman. Faith? Daniel's voice dripped contempt. You mean your delusion, your crutch, the same crutch you hand out to those people like some kind of spiritual narcotic? Don't worry about your circumstances. There's a better place waiting for you. It's pathetic. Councilwoman Patricia Hayes shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Even she, who usually supported Daniel's initiatives, seemed troubled by his viciousness. You know what your problem is? Daniel continued, playing to the cameras now. You can't accept that your time is over. The world has moved on from your Bronze Age mythology and your bleeding heart socialism. We deal in facts now, data, algorithms, not feelings, and certainly not fairy tales. Samuel remained silent, his fingers tracing the rough edges of the wooden cross in his pocket. Nothing to say, Daniel pressed. No scripture to quote, no parable about how the meek shall inherit the earth. He laughed again. Here's a news flash. They won't. They'll inherit cardboard boxes under bridges while people like me build the future, people with actual vision, not delusions. My vision, Samuel finally spoke, sees the value in every human soul. Value? Daniel pulled out his phone, fingers flying across the screen. Let me show you value. The property your shelter sits on, worth $12 million. The tax revenue it would generate, 800,000 annually. The jobs the new development would create, over 200. That's value, not your handful of vagrants and drunks. Timothy isn't a drunk, Samuel said softly. He's a veteran with PTSD. Jennifer isn't a vagrant. She's escaping an abusive... Stories, Daniel almost shouted. Always stories with you people. Well, here's my story. Old man wastes council's time with emotional manipulation. Old man loses. Shelter closes. City prospers. The end. He turned to address the crowd directly. This is what stands in the way of our city's progress, folks. Dinosaurs like Samuel Whitmore, clinging to their ancient superstitions and their misguided compassion. He'd rather see our city stagnate than admit his whole life's work has been a waste. Samuel's shoulders, which had remained straight throughout the assault, finally seemed to bend slightly. Not much, but enough for those in the front row to notice. You want to know the truth? Daniel moved in for what he clearly considered the killing blow. Your shelter will be gone in 6 weeks. Your garden will be paved over. Your little chapel will be rubble. And in 10 years, no one will even remember it existed. No one will remember you existed. You'll be a footnote, if that. A cautionary tale about what happens when sentimentality meets progress. The old man's hand emerged from his pocket, still clutching the small wooden cross. Daniel's eyes fixed on it with undisguised contempt. Still clinging to your little talisman? He reached out and, before anyone could react, knocked it from Samuel's hand. The cross clattered across the floor, sliding under the front row of seats. Oops! Guess your friend upstairs didn't catch that one either. The security guard at the door shifted forward, then stopped, uncertain. Several people in the audience half rose from their seats. Samuel looked at the spot where the cross had disappeared, then back at Daniel. When he spoke, his voice was steady, but filled with something that made even Daniel step back slightly. Not anger. Something else. Something that felt like pity. I forgive you, Samuel said simply. Daniel blinked. You... what? I forgive you, Daniel. For this. For all of it. I didn't ask for your forgiveness, old man. I know. Samuel turned to address the council. I've said what I came to say. The shelter has served this community for 60 years. If you choose to destroy it, that's your decision. But those 43 souls will still need somewhere to go. They'll still need someone to care. And with or without a building, some of us will continue to do just that. He walked toward the exit, his gait slow but dignified. As he passed the front row, a young woman, maybe 25, with paint-stained fingers and kind eyes, slipped the wooden cross back into his hand. He patted her shoulder gently and continued walking. That's it, Daniel called after him. No fight, no righteous anger, you're just going to shuffle away? Samuel paused at the door. Sometimes, Councilman, the strongest thing you can do is refuse to fight on your enemy's terms. He looked back, and for just a moment Daniel saw something in those pale blue eyes that he couldn't quite name. "I'll be praying for you." "Save your prayers," Daniel shot back. "I don't need them." Samuel smiled sadly. "That's exactly why I'll keep offering them." The door closed behind him with a quiet click. Daniel stood alone at the front of the auditorium, victory somehow tasting like ash in his mouth. The crowd began to disperse, their murmurs a mix of shock, disgust, and something else, admiration, but not for him, for the old man who had walked away with his dignity intact, while Daniel, despite winning, somehow felt exposed. "Well," Daniel addressed the remaining council members, his voice lacking its earlier venom, "I think we all know how the vote will go. Meeting adjourned." But as he gathered his papers, he noticed something. People weren't leaving quickly, eager to get away. They were clustering in small groups, talking animatedly. Some were exchanging phone numbers. A woman was setting up what looked like a sign-up sheet. "What's that for?" he asked Patricia as she passed. She looked at him with barely concealed disgust. "Volunteers for the shelter's final 6 weeks. That old man might not have won the vote, but he just recruited about 50 new volunteers." She paused. "You know, Daniel, I've supported you on almost everything, but today you showed us who you really are, and it's ugly." That night, Daniel tried to celebrate his victory at Montgomery's, the upscale bar where the city's power brokers gathered. But conversation died when he entered. People found excuses to leave. Even the bartender, usually chatty, served his scotch in silence. The video had already gone viral. "Heartless politician destroys elderly volunteer" had 3 million views and climbing. The comment section was brutal. Someone had found photos of Samuel at the shelter, feeding the hungry, teaching children to read, holding the hand of a dying AIDS patient in the shelter's hospice wing. The contrast with Daniel's designer suits and sports car was stark, but it was one comment that stopped Daniel cold. "That's Samuel Whitmore. He paid for my mum's cancer treatment when we had nothing. Never asked for anything back. Never even told anyone. I only found out after she died. This man has given everything to others. What has that politician ever given anyone?" Daniel closed his laptop and ordered another scotch. Then another. 3 days later, the calls began. Not from supporters or donors, but from someone unexpected. His estranged father, Richard Frost. The man Daniel hadn't spoken to in 5 years, not since their fight about Daniel's win-at-all-costs philosophy. "I saw the video." Richard's voice was heavy. "Daniel, what happened to you? What happened to the boy who wanted to help people?" "I am helping people, Dad. I'm helping the city prosper. By crushing an old man who volunteers at a homeless shelter, that's prosperity? You don't understand the complexities." "I understand enough. Your mother would be ashamed." The line went dead. Daniel stared at his phone, his mother's face swimming into focus unbidden. She had died when he was 15, but not before making him promise to use his gifts for good. He'd forgotten that promise, buried it under ambition and rationalization. A week passed. The shelter demolition was scheduled, the contract signed. Daniel had won. But the victory felt increasingly hollow as more stories emerged about Samuel Whitmore. The man had been a teacher for 30 years before retirement, had fostered 12 children, had donated a kidney to a stranger, had spent every Christmas for the last decade cooking meals at the shelter. Meanwhile, Daniel's life was unraveling. His girlfriend Rebecca left him, saying she couldn't be with someone capable of such cruelty. His biggest donor pulled funding after his wife saw the video. 3 staff members resigned. Even his dry cleaner had been cold. But the worst was yet to come. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Daniel's phone rang at 2 in the morning. Unknown number. "Daniel Frost?" The voice was professional, clinical. "Yes? This is Dr. Harrison at Memorial Hospital. Your father, Richard Frost, has been in an accident. You should come immediately." The drive to the hospital was a blur. Daniel found his father in the ICU, machines beeping, tubes everywhere. The doctor's words washed over him. Drunk driver, internal bleeding, critical condition. Can I see him? He's unconscious, but you can sit with him. Daniel sat beside his father's bed, holding his hand for the first time in years. Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. For everything. For becoming someone you couldn't recognize, for losing my way. Please don't leave, not like this, not with things broken between us. He sat there for hours until exhaustion overtook him. He woke to a gentle hand on his shoulder. Samuel Whitmore stood beside him, holding 2 cups of coffee. Daniel jerked upright. What are you doing here? I volunteer here too, Samuel said simply, offering him a cup. Hospital chaplain service. I saw your name on the visitor list. Come to gloat? Samuel's eyes were kind. Come to sit with someone in pain. I don't need your pity. It's not pity, Daniel. It's compassion. There's a difference. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Daniel, exhausted and broken, asked, How do you do it? How do you just forgive? After what I did to you. Samuel sipped his coffee. You think forgiveness is for you? It's not. It's for me. Carrying anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I learned that lesson long ago. From your faith? From my son. Daniel looked up, surprised. Michael, he was angry at the world, at me, at everything. Said things far worse than what you said. Cut me out of his life for 10 years. I could have been angry, could have been bitter. But I chose to forgive him every day, even when he wasn't ready to receive it. What happened to him? He died. Overdose. 5 years ago. Samuel's voice was steady but soft. But 6 months before he died, he came back. We had 6 months. 6 precious months because I'd kept my heart open. If I'd let it harden, we'd have had nothing. Daniel looked at his unconscious father. I've hardened everything. Hearts can soften. It's what they're designed to do. Even after what I've become. Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out the wooden cross, the one Daniel had knocked from his hand. This was carved by a man who thought he was irredeemable, thought he'd gone too far, done too much damage. Now he employs 15 people and runs a program for veteran rehabilitation. He placed it in Daniel's hand. Nobody's too far gone. Daniel stared at the rough wood, tears finally coming. I destroyed everything you worked for. The shelter. Buildings can be rebuilt, but souls are irreplaceable, and yours is crying out for healing. I don't know how to fix this. Start with the truth, then see where it leads. Daniel's father stirred, eyes fluttering open. Daniel! Dad, I'm here! Richard's eyes focused, then shifted to Samuel. Recognition dawned. You're from the video. Samuel nodded. Thank you, Richard whispered, for showing me my son needed help. The next morning, Daniel did something that shocked everyone, including himself. He called an emergency council meeting, but instead of sitting at the elevated platform, he stood where Samuel had stood. The auditorium was packed. Word had spread that something unusual was happening. Samuel sat in the front row, having been invited by Daniel personally. 3 weeks ago, Daniel began, his voice unsteady, I stood in this room and humiliated a good man. I attacked his faith, his work, his very existence. I did it for money, for power, for a future that was all about me. The crowd was silent. Samuel Whitmore has spent his life serving others. I've spent mine serving myself. He builds up, I tear down. He forgives, I destroy. And when my father was dying in the hospital, when I was completely alone, guess who showed up? The man I tried to destroy. He brought me coffee. He sat with me. He showed me kindness I didn't deserve. Daniel's voice cracked. I'm resigning from the council, effective immediately. But before I go, I'm proposing one last resolution. The shelter stays. More than that, the city should fund its expansion. We should honor people like Samuel, not destroy them. He walked down from the podium and did something no one expected. He knelt before Samuel, there in front of everyone. I'm sorry. Daniel said, tears flowing freely. "I'm so deeply sorry. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway." Samuel stood slowly, his arthritis making the movement difficult. He reached down and gently helped Daniel to his feet. "You already had it, son. From the moment you knocked that cross from my hand, you had it." They embraced, the old man in his worn vest and the younger man in his expensive suit, while 300 people rose to their feet in spontaneous applause. But the story didn't end there. Over the following months, Daniel liquidated his assets and created a foundation for homeless services. He started volunteering at the shelter, learning the names and stories of every resident. Timothy, the veteran with PTSD, taught him woodworking. Jennifer, the abuse survivor, taught him resilience. Old Thomas, who'd fought in 2 wars, taught him about real courage. The wooden cross stayed in Daniel's pocket, a reminder of the day his life truly began. One evening, 6 months later, Daniel was serving dinner at the shelter when a new resident arrived. A young man, maybe 25, angry at the world, high on something, lashing out at everyone. "Why should I listen to you?" the young man spat at Daniel. "You don't know anything about suffering." Daniel pulled out his phone and showed him the video, the one of him humiliating Samuel. "I was this person, completely lost, completely broken. But someone showed me grace when I deserved judgment. Someone taught me that it's never too late to change direction." The young man watched, confused. "But you're here now, serving soup. The best thing that ever happened to me was losing everything I thought mattered, because I found what actually does." Samuel, now moving even slower but still there every day, overheard. He placed a weathered hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Remember what I told you about hearts? They're designed to soften, and to help other hearts do the same." A year later, the shelter held its grand reopening after expansion. The new wing was named the Richard Frost Memorial Center, after Daniel's father, who had recovered and now volunteered alongside his son. The garden had tripled in size. The chapel had been restored. The dedication ceremony was attended by hundreds, including many who had been helped by the shelter over the years. Marcus, the carpenter who had carved the wooden cross, donated handcrafted furniture for the entire facility. The young woman with paint-stained fingers from that fateful council meeting had painted a massive mural depicting the history of compassion in the community. Daniel stood to speak, pulling out a worn piece of paper. "I want to read something. It's a list I found in Samuel's office. A prayer list. My name was on it. Had been for 3 weeks before I even met him. He was praying for me before he knew who I was. Just saw my name in the paper about the shelter closure and started praying." He looked at Samuel. "You told me that day that the strongest thing someone can do is refuse to fight on the enemy's terms. I understand that now. You weren't my enemy. My enemy was my own pride, my own emptiness. You fought that enemy with weapons I didn't understand: love, forgiveness, grace." Samuel stood with difficulty, Daniel quickly moving to help him. "I have something for you," the old man said. From his pocket, he pulled out a new wooden cross. This one, smooth and polished. "Marcus made this specially. Said every redemption story deserves its own symbol." As Daniel accepted it, someone in the crowd started clapping. Then another. Soon the entire gathering was on its feet, not applauding just Daniel or just Samuel, but the profound truth that transformation is possible, that forgiveness is real, that sometimes the greatest victories come through surrender. Patricia Hayes, the councilwoman, approached the microphone. "The council has something to announce. By unanimous vote, we're establishing the Samuel Whitmore Day of Service. Every year on the anniversary of—" She paused, choosing her words. "Of the day that changed everything. The entire city will be encouraged to volunteer, to serve, to remember that our strength lies not in our power, but in our compassion." Samuel shook his head, uncomfortable with the attention, but the crowd wouldn't be denied. They surrounded him, sharing stories of how he'd touched their lives. A businessman revealed that Samuel had mentored him through bankruptcy. A teacher shared how he'd saved her brother from suicide. Story after story emerged, painting a picture of a life lived entirely for others. As the sun set over the expanded shelter, Daniel and Samuel sat on a bench in the garden, watching volunteers tend to the vegetables that would feed hundreds. "I still don't understand it completely," Daniel admitted. "This faith of yours." Samuel smiled. "Faith isn't always about understanding. Sometimes it's about witnessing. You witnessed something in me that made you curious. That's enough." "What did I witness?" "Love that doesn't keep score, hope that doesn't demand proof, joy that doesn't depend on circumstances." Samuel patted Daniel's knee. "You know, that first day when you were saying all those terrible things, I wasn't seeing you." "What do you mean?" "I was seeing Michael, my son, same anger, same pain underneath it all. And I thought, if I could have one more chance with Michael, I'd absorb every harsh word if it meant eventually reaching his heart. You gave me that chance, to do for you what I couldn't finish with him." Daniel wiped his eyes. "So I reminded you of your loss?" "No, son. You reminded me of the power of redemption. Michael's story ended too soon, but yours is just beginning." A little girl ran up to them, one of the shelter residents, holding a handful of freshly picked cherry tomatoes. "Mr. Samuel, Mr. Daniel, look what grew." Samuel lifted her onto the bench between them. "Those are beautiful, Lily. You helped them grow." "And just like you helped me grow," she said matter-of-factly, then looked at Daniel. "And like you're growing, too. Mama says everyone's always growing, just sometimes in different directions." Out of the mouths of babes, Daniel thought. As the evening deepened, the shelter began its nightly routine. Beds were prepared, meals were served, children were tucked in. Daniel moved through it all, no longer the man in the expensive suit looking down on others, but a servant among servants. Later, as he helped Samuel to his car, the old man finally admitting to being tired, Samuel pressed something else into Daniel's hand. A sealed envelope, yellowed with age. "What's this?" "Open it when you get home." At his modest apartment, he'd sold the penthouse months ago. Daniel opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph and a letter. The photograph showed a much younger Samuel with a teenage boy who looked strikingly like Daniel. Michael, Samuel's son. The letter was dated 5 years ago, just before Michael's death. "Dad, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't say it in person. I'm sorry for everything, for the pain, the anger, the wasted years. You never stopped loving me, even when I gave you every reason to. You told me once that love doesn't keep score. I didn't understand then. I do now. Your forgiveness saved me, even if it took me too long to accept it. If you ever meet someone as lost as I was, love them like you loved me. Maybe they'll find their way home sooner. All my love, Michael." Daniel sat in his small kitchen, crying over a stranger's letter that felt like it was written for him. He thought about paths and choices, about pride and humility, about the moment when everything can change if someone simply chooses love over judgment. The next morning he arrived at the shelter early, finding Samuel already in the garden, his weathered hands working the soil despite the arthritis. "Thank you," Daniel said simply, "for the letter, for everything." Samuel looked up, those pale blue eyes still clear and kind. "Michael would have liked you. You both had to fall hard before you could rise. What made you keep believing? In me? In anyone?" Samuel stood slowly, brushing soil from his hands. "Every sunrise, Daniel. Every single sunrise is proof that darkness doesn't win. Night might last for a season, but morning always comes. You just have to be patient enough to wait for it and brave enough to recognize it when it arrives." They worked side by side in the garden as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows that gradually shortened as the day grew bright. Around them, the shelter stirred to life, children laughing, volunteers arriving, hope taking root in soil that had been tended with faithful hands for decades. 3 years passed. Samuel's health declined, his movements slower, his breathing more labored, but his spirit remained undimmed. Daniel had become his primary caregiver, driving him to appointments, ensuring he took his medications, being the son Samuel had lost and the son Daniel had learned to become. On a cold February morning, Daniel found Samuel in the chapel, slumped in his favorite pew. The old man was still breathing but barely conscious. As the paramedics worked, Samuel gripped Daniel's hand. "The cross," he whispered. Daniel pulled out the wooden cross, the one Samuel had given him. "No," Samuel managed, "the first one, the rough one. Give it to someone who needs it." Those were his last coherent words before slipping into a coma. The hospital waiting room filled with people. Hundreds came to vigil. The homeless, the wealthy, children, elderly, every race and background united in their love for one old man who had loved them first. Daniel kept watch, holding Samuel's hand, whispering stories of all the lives he'd changed, all the good that had grown from his seeds of kindness. On the third night, Samuel's eyes opened one last time. He looked at Daniel, smiled, and said clearly, "Well done, son, well done." He passed peacefully at dawn as the first rays of sunlight entered his room. The funeral was unlike anything the city had ever seen. The cathedral couldn't hold everyone. They set up screens in the park, in the shelter, anywhere people could gather. Daniel gave the eulogy, his voice breaking repeatedly as he spoke of transformation, of forgiveness, of the power of one life lived entirely for others. "Samuel Whitmore believed in lost causes," Daniel said. "He believed in them because he didn't see them as lost. He saw them as seeds waiting for the right conditions to grow. He was the gardener who provided those conditions: love, patience, grace. I was one of those seeds, dead, hard, seemingly beyond hope, but he watered me with forgiveness until I cracked open and grew." At the graveside, as they lowered Samuel's simple pine coffin, he'd requested the money saved go to the shelter, Daniel noticed something. A young man standing at the edge of the crowd, angry-looking, defensive, clothes suggesting hard living. Their eyes met. After the service, Daniel approached him. "I'm Daniel. You look like you could use a cup of coffee." "I don't need your charity." Daniel pulled out the original wooden cross, the rough one Samuel had told him to pass on. "Neither did I, but someone gave it anyway. Changed everything." The young man looked at the cross, then at Daniel. "You're that politician." "From the video." "I was. Now I'm just someone trying to continue what Samuel started. The shelter's serving lunch, good food, no pressure. Just food and maybe a conversation if you want." The young man, Tommy, he said his name was, followed reluctantly. Over soup and bread his story emerged. Addiction, loss, shame, the feeling that he'd gone too far to ever come back. "I know that feeling," Daniel said. "But Samuel taught me something. Nobody's too far gone. Nobody's beyond redemption. It just takes one person believing that to start the journey back." Tommy fingered the rough wooden cross. "This yours? It's yours now, if you want it. A reminder that transformation is possible, that someone believes you can change, even if you don't believe it yet." That night, Daniel stood in Samuel's garden, now his to tend. The vegetables were growing well, fed by the same soil Samuel had worked for decades. In the distance, he could hear the shelter coming alive with evening activity. Volunteers serving dinner, children playing, lives being rebuilt. Patricia Hayes joined him. "The council voted today, unanimous. The shelter gets permanent protected status, can never be sold or demolished. It's Samuel's legacy, sealed in law." Daniel nodded, unable to speak. "You know what struck me at the funeral?" Patricia continued. 3 years ago, you tried to destroy him in that auditorium. Today you carried his coffin. That's not just change, Daniel, that's resurrection." As she left, Daniel remained in the garden, watching the stars emerge. Somewhere among them, he imagined Samuel and Michael reunited, their broken story made whole. Here below, the work continued. Tommy was inside, eating his third bowl of soup, the rough wooden cross in his pocket. Tomorrow, Daniel would teach him to work the garden, just as Samuel had taught Daniel. The cycle of redemption would continue. A child's laughter drifted from the shelter. Someone was singing. Life persisted, hope endured, love conquered. Daniel thought of that day in the auditorium, when he'd stood in apparent victory while Samuel walked away in apparent defeat. How wrong he'd been about winning and losing, about strength and weakness, about what truly mattered. The wooden cross in his pocket was smooth now, polished by 3 years of handling. Every morning he held it and remembered Samuel's words, "Hearts are designed to soften." Every evening he looked for hearts that needed that softening, that needed to know they weren't too far gone. The garden would bloom again come spring. New volunteers would arrive. More lives would be transformed. And somewhere, in big auditoriums and small chapels, in hospitals and homeless shelters, the story would continue. The eternal story of grace overwhelming judgment, love conquering hate, and forgiveness rebuilding what pride had destroyed. Samuel Whitmore was gone, but what he'd planted would grow forever. In Daniel, in Tommy, in countless others who would learn that the strongest thing you can do is refuse to fight on the enemy's terms, that the greatest victory comes through surrender, and that no one, absolutely no one, is beyond the reach of redemption. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and constant. The shelter breathed with sleeping souls. The garden waited for dawn. And Daniel Frost, once a destroyer, now a builder, kept watch through the night, tending what had been entrusted to him, grateful beyond words for the old man who had seen past his hatred to his hurt, past his pride to his pain, and had chosen to love him anyway. This was Samuel's true monument, not a building or a garden or even a day of service, but transformed hearts that would transform other hearts in an endless chain of grace. The rough wooden cross would find its way to Tommy's pocket. In time, Tommy would pass it to someone else. The cycle would continue. Love doesn't keep score. Hope doesn't demand proof. Joy doesn't depend on circumstances. And forgiveness changes everything. As the first light of dawn touched the garden, Daniel whispered into the morning air, "Well done, Samuel. Well done, good and faithful servant. Rest now. We'll take it from here." A gentle breeze stirred the tomato plants, and for just a moment Daniel could swear he smelled his mentor's old pipe tobacco on the wind. He smiled, wiped his eyes, and went inside to start the coffee. There was work to do. There would always be work to do. And that, Daniel now understood, was the greatest gift of all.